Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome back to Weather on the Go, all your weather coverage. In today's weather forecast, we'll be talking about a blistering heat wave bringing temperatures that could be as hot as 130 degrees Fahrenheit into Southern California and Death Valley as we go over the next few days. And then the ring of fire pattern does persist with heavy rain and severe weather, especially across the northern states as we go through the long term, and a full tropical update later on in this video, what to expect across the tropics. We'll get into those details later on in today's video. But currently looking at the weather alerts, you see a lot of colors on the map today. This is mainly for heat across the United States. Anywhere you see orange into South Florida, the southern plains, or even the west coast here, those are heat advisories. Anywhere you see the pinks, those are excessive heat warnings, and the maroon reds are excessive heat watches. So you see a blistering heat wave does continue across portions of the desert Southwest and into the southern plains, and this will likely only expand as we go through the long-term period. So looking at today, we have the center of that ridge of high pressure across the southern Four Corners region into Southern California, into Arizona, New Mexico, and into West Texas today. As we go through this weekend, Saturday into Sunday, we'll start to see the center of that ridge build back to the west. So the west coast will start to see more heat, even up here into Washington State, Oregon, and parts of Idaho, with more that northwesterly flow being dominant across the northern states here into the upper Midwest, the mid-Mississippi Valley, and the Ohio Valley as we go through much of this weekend. So what does this mean for temperatures? Well, today it's going to be sweltering once again across Texas and back to the west, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, Southern Nevada. We're going to be seeing widespread triple-digit heat, 112 today across the Phoenix region and up to 120 or so into Death Valley this afternoon. As we go through Friday, much of the same. We're up to 114 there in Phoenix, perhaps getting close to 130 Fahrenheit across southern parts of California, southwestern Arizona, getting through that Friday time frame. And then even as we go into Saturday, folks, we do continue with more triple-digit heat across Texas Hill Country, and then back westward across the southern Four Corners region. But we're expanding that heat further to the north to include much more of Washington State, Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada as we go into Saturday and even into Sunday as well. And just folks, look at these temperatures. It's 116 or 117 in Phoenix on Saturday, and we're up into the 130 degree mark or so Fahrenheit as we go into southern parts of California and southwestern Arizona around Death Valley as we go into Saturday and probably even Sunday afternoon as well. So this is some dangerous stuff to deal with across the desert Southwest. So make sure you remain hydrated in an air-conditioned room as much as possible. But going back to the storms from yesterday on Wednesday, July 12th, we had a pretty eventful day, a surprise tornado threat up here into northeastern Illinois and southwestern lower Michigan, where we had 7 tornado reports, and this number may be growing over the next couple of days with more storm surveys. We also had several wind reports that goes all the way down with an MCS cluster that moved through portions of the lower Missouri Valley through the Ozarks region as of last night. So more severe storms expected today. We got a couple areas highlighted in yellow. That's a slight risk here. That's a 2 out of 5 on the scale. We're watching that across mainly the Great Plains here today, and a couple areas up into northwest Iowa, southern Minnesota could get in on the severe weather as well. And then we have that stationary boundary setting up more marginally severe storms in between here across the Mid-South, and then picking it back up with a slight risk across portions of interior New England and the lower Ohio Valley as well. Places like Kentucky, southern Ohio, West Virginia, up through Pennsylvania and New York State, and even parts of Vermont. I know they had the flooding up there, and the last thing they need is severe weather, but unfortunately that is the threat moving forward today. And we have the big hail. So we have big hail today across the western high plains from South Dakota, the Rapid City area southward, almost to the Amarillo area, but just stopping short of that in the western Oklahoma panhandle. We could be seeing some 2-inch or larger diameter hailstones across this hatched risk area there, so be watching out for that. And the tornado threat is there as well. It's a low threat, a 2% shading across western Nebraska, eastern Colorado, and northwest Kansas, but it is there. We have a 5% shading of tornadoes in eastern New York State, with a 2% going all the way back into the lower Ohio River Valley through West Virginia Virginia, Pennsylvania, southern Ohio, and into Kentucky here. And so there could be a couple isolated tornadoes along that area as we go through later today. So looking at this afternoon, what the radar could look like, it's summertime. We're going to see a lot of pop-up storms across portions of the United States here. And a couple more organized areas of severe weather we're watching again back into the western Great Plains and then across portions of interior New England back into the lower Ohio Valley this afternoon. We'll start to see more clustering going on as we go into tonight as the low-level jet cranks up across these regions with more organized threats for damaging winds and hail, and yes, possibly even a couple of tornadoes as well. And some of those storms could produce some heavy rainfall up into southern Minnesota and northeast Iowa, an area that definitely needs the rainfall over the next couple of days for sure to eat away at that drought. But then going into late this week and this weekend, on Friday, the stationary boundary really just sets up shop across the Ohio River Valley and the southern plains, bringing more storms across those areas, and it really doesn't go too much farther to the north as we go into Saturday. So more storms across the Ohio Valley, down into the southern plains at times as we go into the early part of this weekend. So on Friday, another slight risk for severe weather across southeastern Kansas, northern parts of Oklahoma, and the southwestern portions there of Missouri. We're watching for an MCS cluster that will originate back here across portions of the Oklahoma and Texas panhandle and race to the east as we go through the day on Friday. Another marginal risk across the Delmarva region up there toward Connecticut and Long Island. Some areas could be seeing some isolated 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts and some quarter-size hail as we go through the day on Friday. And looking at the EPS ensemble, we expect to see those storms. A couple of areas we're watching here back into the Midwest and the Southern Plains. Of course, the main area with that slight risk with an MCS starting to develop later Friday afternoon and going through the nighttime hours across Kansas, northern Oklahoma, and then down through the Ozarks region there in Missouri, northern Arkansas, and maybe starting to fall apart once it reaches toward the Memphis region in western Tennessee. We also see a bit of some thunderstorms developing across southern Wisconsin and eastern Iowa. We could have a couple line segments moving across the Chicagoland area down into central Illinois, southwestern lower Michigan as well, and then more organized activity across the Delmarva all the way up there in towards Boston and Connecticut as we go through Friday night. Then on Saturday, the stationary boundary remains very locked in place across the Ohio Valley, so we have more marginally severe storms. Wouldn't be surprised if this got upgraded to a slight risk in parts of this region into western Ohio, eastern Indiana, or down into central Kentucky in updates from the Storm Prediction Center. But in general, that's the area expected with more organized storm activity going through the early part of the weekend on Saturday as that continues to move off toward the east, toward the mid-Atlantic and the southeast as we go through the day on Sunday. And it's good news that we're starting to see more activity across the United States here, especially into the northern states. This is the new U.S. Drought Monitor from today that was just released, and we are seeing worsening drought expanding in Wisconsin. Southwest Wisconsin is now an extreme drought. That's a level 3 out of 4 on the scale here, and we're starting to see some improvements, though, across the Illinois Valley back to moderate drought, as a lot of those areas were in severe drought before. So some improvements and some worsening of the drought monitor, just depending on where you are in the United States. But looking at the long term, we see the blistering heat wave continue across the southern United States. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. This is through July 22nd, and then near normal to slightly below normal temperatures expected across the Great Lakes region as we go through the long term. And looking at precipitation, it looks dry underneath that ridge. You're not going to be seeing much, if any, rainfall here across the Pacific Northwest, the West Coast, or the Southern Plains. There's an attempt to try and get the monsoon season going, but as long as that high pressure ridge is centered across the Four Corners region, you can just forget about seeing any rainfall for the most part through the period. So we're giving southern Arizona probably a little bit more credit than it needs, but we'll see what happens. The monsoon season could try to start up across that region. Otherwise, the rain chances will be over the top of that ridge across the northern plains, the upper Midwest, and then into the Northeast and the East Coast as we go through that long-term period. Then into early next week, you can see the ridge. It starts to move back east here. So it retrogrades back to the west here, going through Friday, Saturday, and into Sunday. And then early next week, starting Monday into Tuesday, it starts to move a little bit further to the east across Arizona, New Mexico, and into northwest Texas. As we go into that Monday, Tuesday time frame, we have the west northwesterly flow over the top with more active storms and severe weather with heavy rain across the northern plains and the Great Lakes region. And then as we go into late next week, that ridge starts to build further to the east and north as well, including the Missouri Valley and the southeast now, with it expanding across the Arklatex as well. So that will be something to watch going through that Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday time frame of late next week. And just giving you a preview of what the temperatures could look like early next week. Well, what you're seeing today is what you're probably going to get early next week. So more triple-digit heat across Texas, except that expands further to the north. So we see that more into Oklahoma, Arkansas, southern Missouri, and into southern portions of Kansas early next week. And then that expands even further north and east late next week, and with more of the Dixie Alley region in the southeast, the Carolinas starting to get in on the action, Georgia, more 100-degree heat there, and maybe getting close to 100 in St. Louis and southern Illinois as we go into that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday timeframe into late next week. So the heat will be expanding across the United States, and we always have to watch this, the placement of how strong this ridge gets, because wherever the northern periphery of the ridge is, you usually have a stronger jet stream this time of year, and it is pretty strong up here across the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and parts of Iowa there going through next week. And there's also a shortwave trough across the northern states as well. And what that's a fancy term for is there's going to be a weakness in the northern periphery of that ridge, and that's going to provide the threat for some severe weather and heavy rain across the northern states as we go through next week. And looking at the surface-based CAPE trends, what CAPE is just convective available potential energy. This is thunderstorm fuel, so the higher the energy, the higher potential for thunderstorms and thus severe weather. And we do see that starting to build further to the north through Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and even into Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois as we go into next week. So that will be something to keep an eye on. So my severe weather forecast from Monday, July 17th through Friday, July 21st still has that possible category for some severe weather across much of the northern states here, across the Dakotas, Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin here, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois here through the Illinois Valley, and parts of the western Ohio Valley as well. And it could get even as far south and east as Kentucky, Tennessee, and northeastern Arkansas through later next week. We'll have to keep an eye on that as well. Mainly with these setups, you see the potential for progressive derechos, or at least lines of thunderstorms that produce widespread damaging winds, hail, and maybe a few tornadoes. Not usually. We don't see that much tornado activity with these setups. It's mainly just damaging winds and hail, but we'll keep an eye on it. Turning to the full tropical weather update, we're still tracking Tropical Storm Calvin in the eastern Pacific Ocean, and a 20% highlight here across the open waters of the eastern Pacific Basin as well for another area of interest over the next 5 to 7 days. You can see Tropical Storm Calvin right here, and it continues to have its trek further off to the west. Another stronger tropical wave is moving across the Central Americas into the eastern Pacific Basin. This could be the next area of interest, pushing to the west into that 20% zone as we go through the next few days. But Calvin continues to press off to the west-northwest, becoming a hurricane later today, and then probably remaining so all the way through at least Saturday evening before falling back to mid-grade tropical storm status through early next week. And you can see the intensity. Most guidance has it as a Category 1, but we could see that peak potentially at a Category 2 for a few hours at least as we go here through the weekend into early next week. And then it starts to back off toward the middle of next week as it pushes toward Hawaii, back toward a mid-grade or a low-end tropical storm. And just looking at this today, a 993 millibar low here. This continues to push off to the west. It drops to a 992 as we go into Sunday as it moves away from North America, but closer to Hawaii by early next week on Tuesday. This is a 1004 millibar low according to the European forecast model, the ECMWF. And you do see that it gets a little bit close to comfort there for Hawaii, but it's going to be weakening on its way in as well with the cooler waters, but definitely bringing some waves and maybe some stronger winds and heavy rain at times. The GFS model is even weaker at a 1009, also a little bit further to the north, so we'll continue to watch that for Hawaii over the next few days. Looking at the North Atlantic, we have a 60% chance of development over the next few days here. This is well away from any source of land. You have the United States over here, Africa over here, here in the Europe, even farther off the screen. So it's right smack dab in the middle of the North Atlantic here, and you can see that just spinning across the North Atlantic. A lot of shear underneath that, a lot of dry Saharan dust as well, so no other attempts at any tropical systems anytime soon across the North Atlantic, and that remains the case through this weekend. Just a lot of shear underneath, so what it has is what it has to work with getting through this weekend, and it's kind of just spinning across the North Atlantic, not really has any which way to go, just kind of spinning there. Gets a little closer to Europe as we go into later next week, but still comfortably further to the west, so not really near any source of land still through much of next week. What is concerning, though, is the sea surface temperature anomalies across the Atlantic here. It is very warm, especially the MDR here. The main development region, extremely warm. The Caribbean's warm. The Gulf of Mexico and the Western Atlantic is surprisingly extremely warm. We have the heat wave and the ridge across the southern United States. That's helping to fuel these unprecedented warm temperatures at the depths of the ocean here into the Western Atlantic. Look at this, near portions of Bahamas, Key West, getting into the Western Cuba here, much of the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. 30 plus degrees Celsius and even a 37 degrees Celsius area just to the west of the Bahamas, between Bahamas and Florida, recorded just a few days ago. So this is extremely unprecedented heat for this time of year. And if any system decides to move through the Caribbean or even toward the Bahamas, it is game on for a rapid intensification. So hopefully that does not occur, but we'll continue to keep an eye on it. Well, if you like detailed weather breakdowns on North America, including southern Canada, the United States, and the tropics, be sure to hit the subscribe button down below. You won't regret it, I promise you. We have daily updates on this channel. It's absolutely free to subscribe. I do appreciate all the old subscribers, all the new subscribers, and all of the supporters on the channel as well. Thank you so much. Also, like the video down below. If you like today's weather forecast, give it a thumbs up. All these thumbs up go into warning more people about the upcoming weather forecast, the heat, the tropics, and the severe weather. So let's go ahead and get this weather information out to more and more people. So everybody, please press that like button. I do appreciate it. If you want to follow me on Twitter for additional weather forecast updates, hit the description down below the video and follow me with the link down there for Twitter at hweather420. I appreciate that as well. I do update on that platform fairly frequently throughout the week. Otherwise, leave any comments, questions, and concerns below, everybody. I'll get to those later on today, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their Thursday.